Hey guys, we're here today in Valheim, going over 10 tips that will help you conquer the Mistlands. Tip number 1 is to stock up on wisps. No doubt, as soon as you gain access to the wisps, you'll make yourself a wisp light, and you might even make a couple extra in case of a corpse run. But it can be really worth your time to spend a night in Valheim stocking up on extra wisps to take with you into the Mistlands biome. Once you've gotten a wisp and Yggdrasil wood, you will have unlocked the wisp torch in the furniture tab of your building menu. And you might notice right out the gate that this is the only torch in the game that does not require a workbench. And that's because this torch is clearly designed to be placed in the Mistlands to help you repel mist in large areas. So it can be well worth your time to take some with you into the Mistlands, especially your first time there, to light your path as you go. Not only will placing them out in random spots help you illuminate how much you can see, but they can be incredibly invaluable during your corpse run when you might not have an extra wisp light with you, or you just want a visual marker of the direction that you went and the path that you took beforehand. You can also lay out a large number of these to open up huge areas in the Mistlands if you're preparing for a big fight, or you're trying to light up where you want to build a base or outpost. These torches can also be incredibly helpful to lay out paths and markers when you tandem them with the hoe. You can level the ground or use path and ability, and set out decent walkways throughout the Mistlands and light your path along it. Between the wisp torches you can lay out and the Mistwalker's sword, you can likely get a setup where you can re-equip Mechanjord and not need the wisp light quite as much, at least in certain situations when you need to haul something big, and you've already laid yourself out a path. Tip number 2 is simply to be very careful while you're sailing near the Mistlands. Clearly, you're going to have to dock in the Mistlands at some point, and ideally you'll find an open area without much fog and be able to get a portal down. It's just something to keep in mind that Seekers and Gjall are some of the most dangerous, if not the most dangerous creatures there are to ships. Given their ability to fly and cover ground quite quickly, if you don't notice somewhere on the shore or nearby and you get too close with your ship, it can mean certain death. And likely death before you get a portal down in order to get back there quickly. Be on the lookout for these enemies and try not to sail up to any Mistland section that currently has the mist over it. Look for the open areas that are clear skied, and only dock your ship on the outskirts of the biome. Soon as you get docked, make sure you get a portal down so you can make it back in case of your untimely death. It's also worth noting that if you're anything like me and value performance heavily, and you previously adjusted your render distance, it's probably a good idea to up that back up as close to maximum as you can so you can have the Seekers render in as early as possible and be able to detect them from your ship. Tip number 3 is perhaps a small spoiler. And even though everything we're discussing in this biome is likely a spoiler, this tip is probably something you would never think about or wouldn't guess to do if you haven't been to the biome before, so I would definitely think it's a little more spoilery than the others. In light of that, I will have 10 seconds of just gameplay without me talking here, so you can jump to the next chapter before we talk about this next tip. Alrighty, so now on to tip number 3, which is to bring black metal with you on your ship. Hopefully early on in your travels in the Mistlands, you locate a Dverger settlement. Most of these settlements have a component crate in them that will drop an extractor, so you can get sap from the nearby ancient roots. In order to build these sap extractors, you also need 5 black metal ingots, and neither the ingots or the extractor itself are teleportable. So you will have to make a second trip to go get black metal if you did not bring it along. So I recommend bringing at the very least 5 to 15 ingots with you on your ship, so anytime you come across one of these extractors, you can get a proper setup for extracting sap. Once you get the sap extracted, it can be teleported back to your base, so if you bring the black metal with you ahead of time, this eliminates any unneeded trips on your ship. Tip number 4 is to use the Dverger settlements to your advantage. These guys are a neutral faction and can be very powerful. First of all, you need to watch out about hitting any of their stuff while near them, or damaging any of the Dverger themselves, because they can deal quite a bit of damage, and can be difficult to fight when you're prepared. And if you accidentally anger them, they will make quick work of you, since you won't be ready for the fight. But if you stay on their good side, they can be incredibly helpful, fighting both Gjall and Seekers. Anytime you get into a fight with something that you're not quite interested in taking on, or might be too difficult for you, drag them back to a nearby Dverger settlement and let them help you out. Ideally, I'd make sure you don't swing yourself so you don't accidentally screw anything up, and just let them handle the problem for you. And these Dverger can even be helpful to you when they get in the water. They can still fire their magic and light up enemy creatures, So make sure you do not underestimate these guys or anger them unintentionally. Tip number 5 is to prioritize the feather cape. As soon as you get your hands on the materials needed to make most of the items from the Mistlands, you're going to unlock a lot of recipes at the same time, and you might be tempted to jump onto one of the new weapons or armor, which is exactly what I did, but I would recommend making the feather cape first. This is arguably the greatest piece of equipment in the game, and will be invaluable to you while traveling through the Mistlands. Once you get it, it will likely become your favorite piece of equipment as well, and earn your trust. The feather cape makes every other cape in the game completely obsolete, and while I do wish it did not have resistance to frost, so that you did have to make some choices when it came to capes, there's no doubting that this equipment is way better than everything that has come before it. So make sure you get your hands on it so you can glide down any jump or cliff you come across, and even use it to escape fights that you don't want to be in. Keep in mind that while you're using your feather cape, you can regenerate stamina while falling, you can attack while falling, and you can hold down your sprint key to consume stamina to go a little bit faster through the air. Tip number 6 is to camp inside of the ancient skulls. Once you come across these ancient skulls, you'll be harvesting inside of them to get yourself some soft tissue. Once you find out the interior of the skull, it becomes actually quite roomy. I'd recommend leaving as much of the frame there as you can, at least until you need the black marble, and make your camps and your portal houses inside of these skulls. Whenever Seeker roam around, provided there are no big openings, they struggle to get inside and they will not attack the skull itself. And if a Gjall comes in the area, they will not shoot at you while you are inside the skull, allowing you to recover and rest if you're struggling taking it down. This makes these the ideal location to get enemies away from you, or to break away from a fight and potentially teleport home. Mark these on the map, utilize them to your advantage even after you've cleared them out, and you'll be much better off. Tip number 7 is to circle the Gjall. Now, if you don't want to engage with one of these giant creatures, they're actually pretty easy to outrun and get away from. But this tip is if you want to fight them and take them down in order to get biomags, or you're looking to drop some ticks in order to get some blood clots. Do not run directly away from them while you're fighting them in combat. This gives them the high shot to hit you with their fireballs. These guys only shoot attacks directly out of their mouth, which means if you use horizontal movement and can get them turning, they have a much harder time hitting you, or they might not fire at all. And if you feel confident enough, the absolute best way to handle them is to get as tight to them as you can, and then use horizontal movement, which can prevent them from firing any shots at you if you can stay on their back. The only thing you have to watch out for is them dropping ticks on the ground, which seems to happen around every 1.5 to 2 minutes. But if you're hitting their weak spot on their underbelly with a proper ranged weapon, this should be plenty of time to take one down. Gjall's fireball attacks have some blunt damage as an impact, and then they deal fire damage over time, which means you should also utilize any water nearby you to give yourself the wet debuff and to give you some resistance to fire. This can make their attacks almost obsolete and really save you from a mistake you make during the fight. Which moves us into tip number 8, which is that water is actually very important in the Mistlands in a whole lot of ways. Try and pay attention to where any small collections of water like ponds are, and especially pay attention while you're on the shoreline. If you get knocked back into the water, the Seekers can fly out into the water and deal massive damage to you while you are incredibly slow. Make sure you know your surroundings and you do not get put in a bad situation. We've already mentioned how the water can help against the Gjall, but it can also help against the Dverger mage. A lot of them are fire mages, and this can give you some heavy resistance against their damage. But on the flip side of that, if you go against a Dverger ice mage, they will light you up very quickly if you are wet at all. So you need to know your enemy and know your surroundings in order to handle things correctly. On top of all these things, you can use the water to your advantage by running Seekers through the water to get them wet, and allow you to deal very high damage with either your magic, your frost arrows, or Mistwalker. Tip number 9 is to bring the root Harnesk. The root Harnesk gives you resistance to pierce damage, which is what a large amount of enemies in the Mistlands deal. Seekers deal primarily pierce damage and do a little bit of blunt damage on their large charge-up attack. Ticks deal strictly pierce damage to you and can deal massive damage to you if you do not have the resistance. And even the Dverger rogues deal pierce damage. So the root Harnesk can really earn its keep in this biome, even with its lack of high armor. Having this on with a padded helmet and legs, or a carapace helmet and legs when you get to that point, can really nullify almost all of the damage in this biome. The only thing you have to worry about in this setup is your weakness to fire, since the Gjall and the Dverger mages can deal fire damage. This should be pretty manageable by bringing fire resistance mead, And then if you're wearing the feather cape or really any other cape in the game, you should have frost resistance, which should give you resistance to 3 of the 4 damage types that you find in the biome, with the last one being blunt damage, which you don't actually see that much. And tip number 10 is to bring the Eikthyr Forsaken Power. The amount of cliffs and ledges in this biome can really make Eikthyr well worth it with its reduced sprint and jump costs. It can help you break away from a fight when you really need it, help travel the zone really quickly when you're just trying to explore, and in my opinion is the most useful power in the zone. And if you're using the root Harnesk and bringing fire resistance mead, then it's really the only one that makes any sense. You already have the pierce resistance from bone mass, and you would only gain the blunt resist, and you would already have fire and frost resist, making Gjall obsolete. Now this root Harnesk, heavy armor helmet, and heavy armor legs, along with the Eikthyr Forsaken Power, is my recommendation for the easiest time in the Mistlands. But what you might notice is throughout all my video, I am not using this setup. I quite enjoyed playing mage once I got to the Mistlands, and was in the complete light armor setup, and carrying bone mass to cover my weakness to physical damage. So while I recommend the root Harnesk and Eikthyr, there are clearly a lot of different ways to play throughout the Mistlands and survive. Whether you're wanting to go Fenris armor for the speed and gain fire resistance through that, and then carry bone mass to cover the pierce and the blunt damage, or if you want to wear full carapace armor to cover your physical damages and carry Gjall to fight against the frost and the fire damage. A lot of these different ways are manageable, but if you're unsure about how the zone's going to go, or unsure in your combat abilities, then I would go with my previous recommendations, because I do believe that this is the most effective and easiest setup to handle while you're in the Mistlands. Hopefully these tips are helpful to you, can help you conquer the Mistlands, or at the very least alleviate some of the difficulty you might experience inside the new biome. If you have any tips of your own that have helped you in your playthroughs, please post them down in the comments so other players can see them, and we can get as much information out there as possible. Thank you guys for watching, and I will see you next time.